Hi guys, it's me Jodianne. Welcome back to this channel. This is Tarot Talks, and today's Tarot Talk is a companion to my podcast, The Witching Half Hour or so. This one I'm going to break down the High Priestess card. This companion video is more to give you a visual so you can see the cards I'm talking about. So we're going to break down the basic symbology that's always in the card, right? What does it mean? What is the High Priestess about? Typically, she is depicted on a throne between two pillars. She often has a veil behind her. That's the veil of, well, that's the veil between the worlds, right? She is in that space between the two worlds where she can see behind the veil and bring forward messages to you. That's what the veil is about. The other thing she often has is a crown. Traditionally, as you can see in this card, it is a kind of papal crown and it has those bands around it. You'll find as we look at the contemporary cards that that's been changed quite a bit. The High Priestess is usually holding something that depicts knowledge. It traditionally was a book of knowledge and some keys, the keys to the other realm, the whole idea of being able to pass through doorways, pass through different gateways with those keys. And then she's always holding higher knowledge, right? So she has all kinds of things in the card that represent these. Now, as we go through our contemporary decks, you'll see these themes are still there, right? It's super cool because each artist, they kind of have a theme around their deck. And that was my big takeaway when I did the podcast, was how the different artists totally, each theme of the deck can be seen in the High Priestess, right? Because every deck you have has kind of a different theme. That's why I've always brought multiple decks when I do a psychic fair, and I allow my client to choose whatever deck calls them. So with these ones, you'll see well, let's just look at them, okay? You'll see more as we look at them. The different aspects will come out. So first we have the Llewellyn deck. I read with this deck for years and years and years. I really love the palette. It's super beautiful. And in it, we have their High Priestess, Carolwen. Yeah, I thought that was so cool. Are you guys aware of the legend of Carolwen? She is a Celtic goddess, and she has a magical cauldron. She's also the mother of Talisman, I believe, and I might not be pronouncing those great. Anyway, Carolwen and her cauldron, go look it up. It's a great story. So in this, you can see the idea of duality is super present, right? It is those pillars from the first one have been changed, and we have them here in this card as half light and half dark. You can definitely see that duality, the lightness and the darkness in that card, right? One half is bright and beautiful and summery, and the other half is fall and decay, right? Light and dark, death, rebirth. It's all in balance within this card. Next, you have the scrying pool. She's in water. So that's one of the ways that this artist is depicting her ability to see beyond the veil. The veil isn't there, but you will see that behind her, you have the spider web, right? So it's all the symbology is in this card. That's why I wanted to start with it. All the symbology is here. It's just stylized. It's this grove of wisdom. Instead of having her in a temple, she's in a much more sacred place for the Celtics. She's in the forest, right? Way more sacred for the Celtics, to be in the forest rather than inside a temple. In her hands, no book. Instead of a book, she's holding the eagle feather and she's holding wheat. These are precious things, right? The eagle, the feathers are again representing going through the worlds, being able to access the higher realms, the spirit realm. And the wheat is again knowledge of rebirth and death, right? The underworld. There you have her, Carolwen's cauldron. Her cauldron's there too, do you see it? Go look up that story, it's super cool. I totally think you should. So the next card we talked about in the podcast is Legacy of the Divine's High Priestess. I love the different perspective on this card. It's right zoomed in on her. It feels much more inviting than any other of the High Priestess cards in the decks I read, and I think it's because of the point of view of the camera in this, right in on her face. So we know that the High Priestess talks about higher learning, esoteric knowledge. I really feel like in this card, this particular High Priestess is inviting you in to the fold. She's saying, come this way, initiate. I have information for you. I have deep teaching and deep learning for you. Instead of a book, she is holding a scroll. Instead of the keys of knowledge, she is holding the pomegranate, which traditionally, if you look at your lore, a lot of people believe that the apple in the Garden of Eden was actually a pomegranate. And there's other lore around pomegranates being the fruit of knowledge in Persephone's lore. That's what she eats, is 6 seeds of a pomegranate, and that's why she spends 6 months in darkness. So what else do we have here? Oh yeah, the scrying pool is there. You can see it's very subtle, but the idea of a scrying glass is there in the water that she's emerging out of. It's also very telling of above and below, right? She is emerging from the subconscious. She's emerging from the emotion of the water. You have the owl there, which I associate with being able to walk between worlds and with the underworld. The 2 pillars are there, very traditionally there. It's interesting though that this card, instead of being in front of, like on a throne in front of the 2 pillars, because of how it's zoomed in, it really feels like she is in the doorway. I find when I'm reading this deck that it really does come forward, this card, when people are starting to develop psychically. It does come forward as an invitation into the esoteric realms, more than other times when the High Priestess comes up. Every deck has its theme. It highlights different aspects of these archetypes, and each deck speaks to different aspects of your client's or your own hero's journey, right? Because that's what this trip is through the High Arcana. It's the Fool's journey to enlightenment. The High Priestess is the second character he meets on the path, and being of the number 2, you have that idea of balance in there, right? That idea of balancing as above, so below, your inner world and your outer world, balancing everything. Now, let's pick another card. I can't remember which one I talked about next in the podcast, so I'm just going to grab one off the table and go, because I pulled them all out. It is the High Priestess in our Steampunk Tarot. Very stylized deck, very cool deck, okay? This one is probably more keeping with the traditions than the other ones I pulled out, but it's so stylized and cool. She's not wearing a crown, as you can see. She's stolen Slash's hat. Instead of a book, her tool of knowledge is the tarot itself. And in place of a scrying glass, we have the crystal ball. I think it's cool how the artist chose to put the crescent moon of the triple goddess on that, really just highlighting that divine feminine aspect of the moon and the emotions right there on the crystal ball, tying it in with water and the scrying glass. As if we didn't know it was a scrying glass though, right? So again, traditionally, everything is there. You've got the 2 pillars. One is darker, one is made of lighter metal. There's not really a veil, but see how the circus tent is draped there, just like a veil? So all of our traditional symbols are in this card, even though it's a super stylized deck, right? Love it. Next up, we've got the Wildwood Tarot. We've talked about this one before. It's a great one to use when we're teaching because it has a real cool take on the symbols. It takes a real naturalistic look at things. All of the symbology is tied into nature worship and ancestry. Just beautiful stuff, beautiful stuff. You can see that the pillars are missing from this one, and instead they have our High Priestess, who is actually called the Seer. Super cool. So right away in naming it, we are talking about someone who is in touch with spirit and on a spiritual path and initiate of the highest realms. She's standing in the traditional Wiccan pose of as above, so below. One hand reaching up, the other reaching down. Can I fit that in here? No, I can't. One hand reaching up, the other reaching down. She's doing that gesture where we're pulling up from the earth and pulling down from the highest realms. And she's right in front of a scrying pool. This one, instead of being close up and welcoming and talking right to you the way our Legacy of the Divine Tarot does, this one is a seer in trance. So when she comes up in a spread, it's still about looking at the spiritual side of things. It's still about going beyond the veil, but it's more about going deep inward. Really reflecting on where you are in your path, really reflecting on where you're going, where you want to be, and how your choices are reflecting that. Each of these cards, each of these decks, as you work with them, as you study them, as you get used to your decks, you'll find their themes. That's the beauty of when we're living right now, when we have all these amazing artists putting out their different take and their different channeling even of these archetypes and of these messages. It's a beautiful way to use, to even if you're just using the tarot, even if you're using the tarot strictly for your own development and your own way of communicating with your highest self. Other ways they're symbolizing her ability is how she is draped in those feathers. So this is the third time that feathers have come up, right? We have them in our Legacy of the Divine because she has an owl. We have them on the lap of Carolwen, and now draped over the seer in the Wildwood of the Tarot. So that idea of being between the realms, of being up in the higher esoteric realms is there. That's the way they're showing it in this card. So breaking the traditions and staying true to the archetype of the High Priestess. The next card we're going to look at, this is when I was doing the podcast, I just was pulling out cards and just going through and talking about them because the High Priestess is my favorite card. I super resonate with that archetype of seer. Of course I do. I'm out here saying I'm a witch and a seer and to go to my website and book a reading with me. So of course I'm going to resonate with that. I don't buy a deck that I don't resonate with the High Priestess. Now, this next deck we're going to look at, it was gifted to me from one of my very favorite people. She's also a seer and a reader, and it was a gift from me. So I love it. It has so many things I love in it. I don't take it to psychic fairs because it's full of dragons and gargoyles and really dark skull imagery, which I love, love, love. So this High Priestess, when I pulled it out during the podcast, I was floored because it doesn't really fit with our symbology. I'm going to grab her and pop up her picture and you and I can talk about it. There she is, the beautiful Pixie from the Alchemy of England 1977 deck. So the main theme I see is magicalness because, like, come on, she's this gorgeous little pixie. And duality with the idea of pixies and fey creatures and how they're tuned into life and the natural cycles. And then she's got the skulls. So life and death, that's the only duality I can see in this card. We don't have a scrying pool. We don't have a gateway to the esoteric knowledge. Now she's a pixie, so she doesn't really need to travel through the realms to get higher knowledge. She's already innately magical because she's this gorgeous pixie. I do love this card though. I like how she's staring into the skull, discovering the idea of life and death. And it's so like circa Shakespeare, so circa Hamlet. Yeah. And I love that I came across this because we can still use this card. I super love that when I was doing the podcast and when I was recording, I just naturally happened upon a card that didn't fit, right? So how do we read this when this comes up in a spread? How do we relate this to the idea of esoteric knowledge? She's still calling you to look within. That's why she's staring deep into the skull. She still has the duality of light and dark. But that's it, babies. When I have a deck like this, where the symbology isn't there, I already know the meanings of the cards. And you could really feel into this, right? You could look at all the other cards around and see what aspect of the High Priestess is being highlighted when you are reading this. Even though it doesn't have the traditional symbols, it's still a High Priestess card. It's still the number 2. It's still the second person that the Fool meets on their journey. So it's still going to be about connecting with your inner magic, connecting with the other realms, and duality. The last card we're going to look at is from my newest deck, and it is another very stylized deck. It is the Deviant Moon Tarot. So the Deviant Moon Tarot is new to me. I've just started working with it, and look at this. I think that's the thing, you know, once you start getting above 8 decks, you really start diving into some really cool ones. And I love that I have these decks that are outside of the norm as well. Now, this is a High Priestess I would not want to trifle with. Very powerful vibe here. She has a lot of the traditional things, even though she's a very arty stylized deck. She's in a throne. The idea of the pillars is in the background there, those 2 buildings way in the background. And then we also have the wings. We still have that feather idea that we were talking about, where the wings and feathers and flight birds are representing traveling between the 2 realms. Now you'll see this deck often, what I've found while reading it, and I've only done a few readings with it, that it really talks about the shadow aspect or the underlying aspects of what's going on. Where a lot of our High Priestesses are lovingly welcoming us either into the fold of the seers or offering us messages from beyond the veil. I feel like she is on the other side of the veil and definitely being blunt with her message. Not unkind, just to the heart of the matter. I would look to the other cards around this for her message. And I would know if this card came up in this deck that we are talking about some of our deeper emotional motivations. Whoa, the energy, right? Super contrast to our beautiful Pixie, right? Who's very playful and inviting you into the mystery. This is very much like heavy. Oh, and she's not carrying any of the symbols of knowledge. She doesn't have a book. She doesn't have a scroll, but she is in, again, a very traditional stance, right? Makes me think of Egyptians in a way. You know what I mean? Like when they hold their 2 things, the ankh and the whatever else it is. Yeah. Okay. So there you have it. We have 6 different decks, 6 different High Priestess. All have similar symbology, ideals, and messages. Each artist is diving into their own creativity to bring forward the theme of their deck. So for me, in doing this one and recording, one of my big takeaways was to really tune into the theme of our decks. Look at it. Pay attention when you're doing your readings for yourself, which deck you choose. Pay attention when doing your readings for your clients, which deck they choose. How is their choice of what's resonating with them, what artists are resonating with them? How does that reflect in where they are in their question and the kind of knowledge they're seeking? Because I don't think I would pull this deck if I was asking about my crush and how that was going to go, right? This is a deck you use when you're diving into much deeper ideals around your journey and your soul's journey and your healing path, right? And maybe she's not going to talk to you about your healing path, but definitely this little seer has got things to tell you about what's happening in the world around you and transformation and how you're showing up in the world, right? Where this aspect of the High Priestess is talking more about looking deep, deep within to see your own motivation, to see your own desires. And she's inviting you to higher realms, to higher areas and saying, yes, initiate, come this way. Your intuition is spot on. I confirm what's going on for you. So think about your decks, lovelies. Think about how you can relate to them. Think about which cards you resonate with the most, because I resonate the most with the High Priestess. What card in the High Arcana do you resonate with most? Anyway, that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this. Please go check out the podcast, have a listen to it. If you're liking this, please subscribe. I'm going to start putting out a monthly tarot reading for everyone. I started that in January this year. So January's yearly forecast is up. There's 2 of them for whichever one resonates with you. I use the As Above, So Below deck for that. And I posted a February reading, and I'll be posting a March reading too. Every month, tune in, have a look at what's in store for you and the energies around us. All right, babies, have a blessed day.